I've been out early in the morning so I can pick some brambles. I freeze some, stew others and make bramble jelly. Some fresh ones for even, it's going into a fruit flan tonight for this evening. Jamie's kitchen doesn't have a look in. I don't get paid to forage for fruit, but it is rewarding. The next crop might be some sloe berries. We have a harvest story today that has something to teach us. Have you ever felt that life isn't fair? You might have said it as a child when you recall your mum or your dad getting you into trouble when in your view you thought it was your brother or sister's fault. You might feel like that today about something that happened this week, or you've carried those feelings for some time, so when someone's name or an issue crops up in the news, it can open up an old wound and we could be fuming inside. Our Christian faith, viewed this way, can also look unfair. We might not admit it, but it can be a trouble to us that God loves another person just as much as us. How can that be? Those first listeners of Jesus' story about the workers may well have a thought and felt that the ending of the story was unfair. It was a usual scenario in Jesus' day when men who wanted to work would go each morning to the marketplace. Early in the morning, the employer would turn up at the marketplace, they'd select the workers for that day and they agree a day's wage. So in Jesus' story, the vineyard owner hired some men, he agreed to pay those who started in the mornings a day's wage, and the employer sent the men into the vineyard. Now the harvest was massive, so they needed to be quick to pick the grapes. So the owner decided that he needed more workers. So he went to the marketplace several times in the day. He went at 9 o'clock, at noon, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Each time he sent more workers into the vineyard. The only difference with the morning crew was they didn't agree a wage. The owner promised to pay proper wages to each of the workers. At about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the owner went to the marketplace again, and despite the workers finishing at 6 o'clock when the evening began, in the marketplace the owner found who was still standing there. He asked them why they were still there. The reason was nobody had hired them, so the owner sent them into his vineyard for the last hour of the day. Again, no guarantee of payment. At the end of the day, the workers came for their pay. The owner told this manager to pay each man a day's wage. He told the manager to pay the last ones first and the first ones last. The men who had worked 1 hour must have been happy. They had received a full day's pay for just 1 hour's work. The other men who had not worked all day must have been happy as well. The workers and their families depended on what they could earn. Perhaps the owner was a kind man. He knew that these were poor people. He realised that they needed the money. Probably he also wanted to be generous because the harvest was so plentiful. However, those workers who had worked all day expected more money. They forgot that they had agreed the wage. They complained that it was not fair. Those men who worked 1 hour had received the same pay. And the owner answered one of these men. He had paid the wage they had agreed that morning. It was a fair wage. It was his money. He could do what he wanted with it. He had chosen to be generous. He chose to pay the other men the same amount. So what was Jesus saying? The kingdom of heaven is like the owner in the story. The story shows that God is like that. He does not pay us what we deserve. We deserve nothing from him. He does not give to us what we consider to be fair. He does not reward us because of our rank or importance or our age, where we live, or whether we are first or last. All who belong to God are his people. God is generous to all his people. God's love is not earned, it's given. There's a place in God's heart for all God's people. Even the least important have a place there. Some people serve God for their whole lives. Other people only begin to serve God a short time later in life. They are all God's servants, and they all receive his gift of love. I hope you have a chance to read Jesus' story of the worker and the owner of the vineyard. It's a shocking story. If I were them, I'd be annoyed inside. Even so, did they not deserve more because even though they had agreed a wage? There are some facts to take away. In the end, the owner needed the harvest gathered in, wherever the cost. The owner had the power to decide, as it was his vineyard and his money. The morning workers were the only ones to agree a wage. The rest just took a chance and it paid off. It is a reminder about how we tick as human beings. We even recall shouting as a child, "That's not fair." Or we say to ourselves, "I deserve that." We can let that way of thinking seep into our lives, and fairness and a sense of what we deserve can affect our attitude, our emotions, our behaviour, our faith. It bubbles to the surface when circumstances or decisions don't go our way. What can happen too is if we start to have an opinion about others, we would then think, "He doesn't deserve that." We can kick against life when it's not fair. The problem with that is like kicking a brick wall. There's been a lot happening over lockdown that's tested our sense of fairness. People angry at the restrictions, restricted hospital visits, stressed out about exam results, redundancies, some continuing to work while others are on furlough, an escalation of migrants crossing the channel. Who keeps the COVID restrictions and who doesn't? Whatever the rights or wrongs of these circumstances, and however we work out what fairness means or who deserves what, is the reason why Jesus is actually telling this story. As fairness and deserving something has limits to how we think this world will spin around. Indeed, from this story, it's no place in our faith. Why? Well, faith is a gift, not something that's earned. That's why Jesus is pressing our buttons to stop us thinking this way. Otherwise, we'll miss out in understanding how God's love works in a different way. We are not the ones to pick and choose. The best way to counter this thinking and understand the point of Jesus' story is to see everything that we have as a gift from God. Everything. The last breath we just took. The place we live or call home. Our family, our job, our money. And on it goes. Everything is a gift. A gift is given out of kindness, not because we've earned it, but because someone else wants to give it to us, regardless. It's what the Bible calls grace or mercy. Someone once said about grace using the letters of the word to make the sentence, God's riches at Christ's expense. The question is, what do we want to do with this gift? Some of us, like latecomers to the vineyard in the story, will be relieved to know God loves us because we've been given a chance that we never expected. For others of us, we might feel more frustrated because we've been at this faith journey for a lifetime. We've been through thick and thin. So some of us might be tempted to think that some others we know do not match up or deserve God's love. We might not say it, but the thoughts are there. We might say, well, I've been helping out this church and in this building for years. And some of these members, they would need Google Maps to find out where their church is. But in the end, it's not for us to decide, is it? It's God. Indeed, none of us deserve God's love because none of us are perfect. So just as well, God's love is a gift. We need to come to a place in our hearts and minds where we accept that for ourselves and others, that everything is a gift. Otherwise, frustration and bitterness builds up, the best thing is to accept God's love as a gift, as it stops us looking at life harshly and kicking against a brick wall. It takes us away from that anger towards contentment, from stress to peace, closed hearts to open hearts, accepting rather than rejecting, giving others a chance rather than giving up on others. So give it a try. When thoughts sneak in, where we measure life by fairness or what we deserve, remind ourselves, everything is a gift. God's gift of love through Jesus is for all.